It was an early morning at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, a usual buzz of activity filling the air as passengers made their way through the terminal. Among them was a familiar face, one that most would recognize immediately. Donald Trump, towering over many of the other travelers, walked with a steady, purposeful gait, his iconic hair perfectly styled, his expression one of quiet determination. He had always been a man who attracted attention, but today he seemed intent on avoiding it. It wasn't uncommon for the billionaire businessman turned former president to board flights under the scrutiny of the public eye, but today he was in a mood to simply disappear into the background. He had his own reasons for flying commercial this time, but for now, they remained his secret. As Trump entered the first-class cabin, the flight attendants stood a little taller, as if they knew something the passengers didn't. His usual aloofness had melted away, replaced with a sense of quiet reflection. Trump took his seat by the window, flipping open a newspaper, his mind clearly elsewhere. The cabin was only partially full, just a few passengers here and there, each lost in their own thoughts as the flight crew made final preparations. And then, just as the doors closed and the plane began to taxi down the runway, the unexpected happened. Near the back of the plane, a new face had appeared. An elderly woman, in her mid-70s, slowly made her way toward her seat in economy. She was dressed in a military jacket, adorned with faded patches and a single silver star that gleamed under the harsh overhead light. Her gait was slow but deliberate, her back slightly hunched as she carried a small leather duffel bag. She wore the quiet pride of someone who had lived through difficult times, someone who had served a country she loved. Passengers exchanged curious glances, and a few whispered as the woman made her way to her seat. She was clearly a veteran, and the respect she commanded from the other travelers was palpable. But as she reached her seat in the cramped economy section, something went wrong. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the rows of seats as though unsure where to sit. The flight attendants came to assist, but after a few seconds, the situation grew tense. The veteran, visibly struggling, leaned forward, her hand gripping the armrest as she winced with discomfort. Her breathing became shallow, and it was clear she was having trouble adjusting to the less-than-ideal space. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I can sit here." The flight attendant, taken aback, stepped forward. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "I can't sit like this," she replied softly. "My back. It's too much." As the commotion continued to ripple through the cabin, Donald Trump, sitting in the front of the plane, could hear the quiet murmur of voices behind him. The veteran was struggling more than just physically. He could tell something wasn't right. Despite his usual distaste for interruptions, something about this moment struck him deeply. His thoughts swirled. He had faced adversity, challenges, and criticisms all his life. But this was different. He wasn't used to seeing someone in this kind of distress, especially someone who had given so much to the country. The cabin was filled with murmurs now, passengers exchanging glances, some watching the scene unfold with curiosity, others with growing unease. The flight attendants were still busy trying to find an alternative seat for the veteran, but it was clear that no solution was readily available. Without saying a word, Trump stood up. The movement was smooth, calculated, almost regal. His tall frame rose like a quiet storm in the middle of a calm sea. He looked toward the back of the plane, his eyes scanning the scene for a moment. Then, without hesitation, he pressed the call button for the flight attendant. When the attendant arrived, he simply said, "Can I switch seats with the lady in the back?" The one in the military jacket. The flight attendant blinked in surprise. "Mr. Trump, are you sure? That's your seat." It's first class. Trump gave a firm nod, his jaw set. "She needs it more than I do." There was a pause, just a brief, charged moment, before the attendant nodded in stunned agreement. As she made her way toward the back of the plane to inform the veteran, whispers began to spread among the first-class passengers. A few raised eyebrows, Others exchanged confused glances. This was not typical behavior for someone of Trump's stature, and yet there he was, preparing to leave the luxury of first class for the cramped quarters of economy. When the flight attendant returned to the veteran, she relayed the message, "Mr. Trump has offered to give you his seat." The veteran blinked in disbelief, glancing toward the front of the plane where Trump stood, gathering his things. "He's giving me his seat." Her voice wavered with emotion. The flight attendant nodded. He insisted. Slowly, the veteran stood, her hands trembling slightly as she made her way toward first class. Passengers continued to whisper, their eyes darting from the front to the back of the plane. Unsure of what exactly was happening. As the veteran settled into Trump's seat, adjusting her frail body into the plush chair. A new silence fell over the cabin. It wasn't just the comfort of first class that had everyone stunned. It was the unexpected generosity of the moment. Here was a man who had everything, who could have easily ignored the woman in need. But instead, he had chosen to act selflessly. In the economy section, Trump took his seat. The space was tighter, the air less comfortable, but his demeanor remained unchanged. He opened his briefcase, removing a few papers, and pretended to focus on his work. But his mind was elsewhere. He had made a decision, a simple act of kindness, but one that would resonate far beyond this flight. As the plane soared into the sky. Reaching cruising altitude, the veteran sat in first class, adjusting to her new surroundings. The luxury of the seat, the soft leather, the gentle hum of the plane, it was all so different from the years she had spent serving her country, the hardships she had faced both abroad and at home. She sat quietly for a moment, deep in thought. But then, as though compelled by some unseen force, she turned to the passenger seated next to her, a middle-aged woman who had been watching the whole exchange with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I need to tell you something," the veteran began, her voice trembling as she spoke. "That man, Mr. Trump, he doesn't know it, but his family saved my life." The woman blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" The veteran's eyes grew distant, and her voice lowered. "It was during the Vietnam War. I was stationed overseas, injured, and without a home to return to. I had no one to turn to. But one day, a man saw me struggling outside a diner in New York. He didn't just offer me a handout. He offered me a future. That man was Donald Trump's father, Fred." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. "Fred Trump? But how?" The veteran nodded slowly, her voice tinged with gratitude. "He gave me a job, a roof over my head, and a chance to rebuild. He didn't owe me anything, but he gave me everything. I never had the chance to thank him. But today, his grandson gave me something I never expected." By now, the story had begun to spread throughout first class. Passengers leaned in, listening intently, as the veteran recounted the story of how Fred Trump had helped her when no one else would. "And then," she added quietly, "and today, his grandson gave me this seat." The story rippled through the cabin, weaving a thread of connection among the passengers. They looked at Donald Trump, who was now in the economy section, his presence felt even in the cramped space. He was a man of wealth and power, but here, on this flight, he had chosen to be something more. He had chosen to be a man of integrity, a man who understood the true value of kindness. As the plane descended toward Newark, the veteran, now visibly emotional, turned to the flight attendant. "Can you tell him? Can you tell him what his family did for me?" The attendant hesitated, but nodded. "I'll tell him, but I think it would be more meaningful if you told him yourself." When the plane landed, the veteran stood and made her way toward economy. She approached Trump, who had been quietly awaiting the end of the flight. With a gentle smile, she extended her hand. "You don't know me," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I wanted to thank you. What you did today. It brought me full circle." Trump looked up at her, his expression softening. "It was nothing," he replied. You deserve it. As the passengers disembarked, many paused to offer words of gratitude to the veteran for her service. But it was the connection between the two of them, Donald Trump and the veteran, that left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed the moment. A simple act of kindness. A seat on a plane. But sometimes, it's the smallest gestures that create the biggest ripples. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more amazing content like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you more captivating stories every week. And hey, make sure to click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for more exciting content coming your way soon. Until next time, take care and keep the curiosity alive.